This CACFP meal pattern webinar on special dietary needs was presented on February 20th, 2019 to a center sponsor audience. The version you are currently viewing has been edited and shortened from the original.
Okay, hello and welcome to the Meal Pattern Success webinar on special dietary needs. My name is Dee Dee Pointer and I will be presenting the webinar today. I'm joined by Nicole Gregoroff, who will be helping me run the training. Before we get started, since this is a webinar, all microphones will be muted, but we will be accepting questions through the questions and answers box. At the end of the session, we'll have a few minutes to answer any questions you might have submitted. Today, we'll go over what a special dietary need is, and we'll look at a few forms you might need if you get a menu substitution request. Then we'll look at a step-by-step example of what to do if you get a special dietary needs request. And finally, we'll look at some additional resources that will help you with processing and managing these requests. At the very end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. When we're talking about special dietary needs, we're talking about changes that must be made to the meal pattern because a participant cannot have an item due to various reasons, including medical reasons or because of personal preference or religious beliefs. Special dietary needs that are due to disabilities must be accommodated, and the definition of disability is broad enough that most physical and mental impairments will be considered a disability. Special dietary needs that are due to personal preference, however, are not required to be accommodated, although sponsors or providers can choose to accommodate them. So for example, a participant with celiac disease who needs grain alternatives would be considered to have a disability and must be accommodated, while a vegetarian participant requesting meals without meat would be considered to have a personal preference and would not necessarily have to be accommodated. For CACFP, there's a few different categories of special dietary needs. Depending on which category it falls under, you might or might not need additional completed forms in order for the meals to be reimbursable. There are special dietary needs due to disabilities, and then there are special dietary needs for other reasons. Other reasons are often due to parental or child preference. For both disabilities and other reasons, accommodations can either fall within meal pattern requirements or they can be outside of meal pattern requirements. For example, let's examine the case of a child who comes from a vegan family. This would fall under personal preference or other reasons, and the center or site can decide whether they want to accommodate their dietary request. As best practice, we generally recommend accommodating requests if they are feasible, since most requests are easy to make. However, it is not required. If you were going to serve this child the lunch that's on the screen, you will need to substitute the egg, since vegans do not eat animal products. You can substitute the egg with vegan baked beans. You can also substitute the cow's milk with a nutritionally equivalent soy milk, which we'll touch on in a moment. In this case, if the vegan child gets beans instead of an egg and a nutritionally equivalent soy milk instead of cow's milk, they would still be receiving a fully reimbursable lunch, since this meal has all 5 required components. Let's look at another example where a child has milk allergies. This would fall under a disability, since this is a medical issue that will affect a major life function, such as digestion and possibly breathing. Since the child can't have milk, you will need to replace the milk with something else. Fluid milk is a tough component to substitute, since there aren't many other options to substitute. If the child can drink soy milk, you can substitute the fluid milk with soy milk that is considered nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. Anytime you're substituting something in the fluid milk component, you're going to want to make sure that you have one of 2 documents. If you're substituting the cow's milk with a nutritionally equivalent soy milk, the parent can sign the milk substitute request form, or if the cow's milk was substituted with another non-nutritionally equivalent milk alternate, then the parent or guardian will need to go to their doctor or other licensed healthcare professional and get a medical statement for accommodating disabilities form signed and completed. No matter the reason, many special dietary needs outside of the fluid milk component can be accommodated within the meal pattern. For example, if you have a child who's intolerant to strawberries, you can replace the strawberries with apples or another fruit and still serve the child a fully reimbursable meal. Usually the only meal component that cannot be accommodated within the meal pattern is the fluid milk component, as we illustrated in this example earlier. Even though there are many types of creditable milks, if a child does not drink cow's milk, they will often need accommodations outside of the meal pattern. In these cases, the form that you will use will depend on whether the milk alternate is nutritionally equivalent or not. When you're serving milk substitutions, whether for a disability or another reason, they can be creditable if they meet the same nutritional profile as fluid milk, which is great in theory. In practice, though, there's only a few specific brands of soy milk that meet the same nutritional profile as cow's milk. As a side note, lactose-free cow's milk is creditable, like any cow's milk, but it must meet the same fat content requirements. Let's go ahead and take a look at the ODE CMP Special Dietary Needs page to look into nutritionally equivalent soy milks. On the Special Dietary Needs page, which you can also reach from the sidebar of the ODE CMP CACFP webpage, there's a link titled List of Milk Substitutes Nutritionally Equivalent to Milk. This link, which we'll click on now, takes you to the background information for milk substitutes and provides information on which milk substitutes are allowed and the nutritional profile they need to meet. You can scroll down to the bottom and see the soy milk listed. Be careful when you're serving soy milk. When you're serving children under age 6, you are only allowed to serve plain soy milk, not vanilla or chocolate, because those are considered flavored milks even though they are listed as allowed by ODE CMP. We'll go ahead and return to the PowerPoint now. So when you serve a nutritionally equivalent milk, for example, you might serve Silk Original Soy Milk, you can provide the milk substitute request form to the parent or guardian to complete. The parent or guardian, or a healthcare professional, can sign and date the form and return to you. Remember that this form will only be applicable for select soy milk brands that are nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. These are the non-dairy beverages that were listed on the website we saw earlier. If you're not serving a nutritionally equivalent milk substitute, then the parent or guardian will need to get their licensed healthcare professional to complete a medical statement for accommodating disabilities. Let's take a look at this medical statement in detail. You can adjust the form to include your organization's name at the top. The section below that should be filled out by your center's staff. Remember to include the name of the staff person who should receive the form and the site name. This is especially important if you have multiple sites with multiple staff members responsible. Next, you can fill out the name of the participant and parent guardian name, or leave it for the parent guardian to fill out. The parent guardian will then take this to their state licensed healthcare professional and get the next few sections filled out. In this example, Ashley's doctor will include which major bodily function is affected, her digestion. It doesn't have to be a diagnosis and does not need to include the word disability. The doctor should also include the meal accommodation plan. These are the foods to be avoided, or it can include information on texture modifications, staffing needs, or the tools that might be needed to accommodate the meal. Here it's stated that Ashley should avoid cow's milk and soy milk due to her cow and soy milk allergies, causing digestive issues. Next, the doctor or licensed healthcare professional should also include the foods to be substituted or the recommended alternatives. Ashley's doctor suggests almond milk here. Finally, you'll need to make sure there's a signature from the licensed healthcare professional along with a date. In Oregon, licensed healthcare professionals can include medical doctors, doctors of osteopathy, naturopathic doctors, physician's assistants, certified nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, dentists, and optometrists. Once that's completed, Ashley's mom will bring it back to your staff member listed up top, and then your staff member will look at the form, evaluate it, and indicate what you will serve for Ashley. Your center will serve Ashley the almond milk in place of fluid cow's milk. Your staff member will sign it, and the form will be valid from that day forward. The form will not need to be renewed annually and will be valid as long as the diagnosis is valid. You do not need to have the information on this specific form. If a parent comes in with a doctor's note that includes all the necessary information, the parts that are highlighted in red boxes, that can be considered a valid written statement as well. But having the medical statement form can make the parents' lives easier since it includes all the necessary elements. In addition to being used for non-nutritionally equivalent milk substitutes, this form will be used for all meal substitutions requests due to a disability. When a child has a special dietary need that is not a disability, the sponsor or provider can decide whether or not to accommodate the request. In these cases, follow your site's policy. If you don't have a policy in place, you will want to create one and make sure all staff is trained on your policy. The main goal is to be consistent, since you can choose to either accommodate the request or not. If you choose to not accommodate, make sure that you're being consistent with your denials. You want to be sure that you're treating all situations the same way. By accommodating one request and not a similar one later, you can open yourself up to civil rights violations. For non-disability requests, meals that meet the meal pattern are reimbursable. For example, you might have a child whose parent requests a gluten-free diet because of their lifestyle, and you choose to accommodate the child by providing whole grain-rich gluten-free items for their meals and snacks. These meals would be reimbursable. If, however, you provide a gluten-free item that is not whole grain-rich, and that is the one whole grain-rich item you're serving that day, then that meal will be missing a meal component and would not be reimbursable. This is because part of the grains component requirement is having at least one whole grain-rich item per day. Meals with substitutions that are missing meal components and not due to disabilities will be considered non-reimbursable. Okay, so let's put together everything we learned today by going through the steps you would take after you get a special dietary needs request. After you get a special dietary needs request, you will likely want to talk with the family members first. You will want to figure out if this dietary substitution is for a disability or not. If this is due to a medical disability, and the definitions for those are very broad, then you must accommodate the request. If it is a disability, figure out if accommodating the disability will result in a reimbursable meal. For example, if the disability results in a child not being able to eat shellfish and you don't serve shellfish, then the meals will meet the needs of the participant without any substitutions and will be reimbursable. If you do serve shellfish, then a simple substitution of another meat or meat alternate will result in a reimbursable meal as well. In these cases, you do not need to have any additional forms for the meals to be reimbursable. If this is a disability that does not meet meal pattern, for example, you have a child that needs to have almond milk substituted for the fluid cow's milk, then you will want to provide the family with a medical statement for accommodating disabilities form. The family will go to their doctor or other licensed healthcare professional and return the form to you. In the meantime, start accommodating the request. If you document the conversation with the family by writing down the date of the request, the modification that the family is requesting, including what foods to avoid and what foods to substitute, and when the family will return with the completed medical statement, then the meals can be reimbursed, even before the medical statement is on file. Remember to follow up with the family to get the completed form on file. If you get a request for a non-disability reason that meets meal pattern, then you will be able to claim the meal. For example, you might have a participant who is requesting soy milk because they do not like cow's milk. If you are able to serve a nutritionally equivalent soy milk, this will meet meal pattern as long as the completed milk substitute form is on file. Another non-disability request might include a request to have kosher meals that your site decides to accommodate. As long as the kosher meals also meet meal pattern requirements, then the meals will be reimbursable. Situations in which you get non-reimbursable meals are when you have a special dietary needs request that is not due to a disability and does not meet meal pattern. For example, you have a family who is insisting on almond milk for their child because of taste preference. This is considered a non-disability reason, and almond milk will not meet meal pattern requirements since there are currently no almond milks out there that are nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. In these cases, like with all non-disability special dietary needs requests, your center or home can choose whether or not to accommodate these requests in accordance with your center or home's policy. If you do decide to accommodate the request, you will have to disallow the meal, meaning you will not claim those meals for reimbursement since the meals will not meet meal pattern requirements. At the end of the conversation with the parent or guardian, you will figure out if this is a request for a disability, whether the family will need a milk substitute form, a medical statement, or no forms at all, and whether the meal substitutions for the participant will result in a reimbursable meal or not. From the chart, you can see that in many situations, even when there is a meal substitution request, the meals will likely still be reimbursable. Once you talk to the family, the next steps will be to look at your menus for the upcoming weeks and figure out what you need to change on your menus and what you will be substituting if you have agreed to make the substitutions. For example, you might need to add soy milk to your working menu. The working menu is the menu that you keep for your records, showing exactly what you served that day. You might have a child who does not eat beef, but can have other meats, and you have agreed with the parents to substitute chicken or other available meats or meat alternates in those cases. In this case, you will want to substitute the beef tacos for chicken tacos for that child. If you're one of the sponsors who has 10 or more special dietary needs to accommodate, then you might want to keep a separate sheet with all dietary accommodations and then attach that list to your working menu for your records. Once you're done making your substitutions, look over your menus and make sure that all the meals are reimbursable. Let's say that you had a new participant starting next Friday who would need a gluten-free diet. In this case, you might serve a gluten-free pizza. However, if the gluten-free pizza is not whole grain rich and that is the only meal with a whole grain rich item, then the meal for child 3 will not be reimbursable. When you have meals which are not reimbursable, make sure you have a system to disallow those meals. You can either work with the meal count taker to make sure non-creditable meals are not counted during the actual meal count, or during meal count consolidation time, you will want to make sure that there's a system in place to disallow the meals before you submit your claims. After you look at your menu, you will want to make sure that you get any additional supplies for those substitutions. For example, if you don't have any soy milk or gluten-free pizza in stock, you will want to add that to your shopping list or vendor list. If you're increasing portions of a certain food item, you will want to make sure there's enough servings for all your participants. This is why you'll want to make sure that your special dietary needs are worked out with your participants and their families as soon as possible, so you will have enough lead time to update your menus and accommodate the requests. Once all of the menu updates and purchases are done, then you will want to follow up with the family and make sure that all required forms have been turned in. Not all special dietary needs will need additional forms, but in situations where they are required for missing meal components or nutritionally equivalent milks, then you will want to follow up. In some cases, it may take families a week or longer to get medical statements, since it might take time to go in to see their licensed healthcare professional. Work with the families on a deadline to return the completed forms. If the families have verified that this is a disability and the accommodations are required, remember that you can start claiming the meals once you start accommodating the request. If the forms are delayed, contact the family and request the form. In these situations, you will want to document the date when you spoke with the family and any follow-up dates so that you and your staff will be aware of what accommodations need to be made for which participant while you wait for the official documentation. Remember that these forms are a helpful tool for you and your staff in addition to verifying that all participants are getting a reimbursable meal. When you have documentation showing the correct meal substitutions to be made, it makes menu changes easier to understand for all involved staff. Finally, you'll want to verify that all meal claims are accurate once you're ready to file your claims. You already took a look to make sure that only reimbursable meals are counted in Step 2, but a lot can happen between Step 2 and Step 4. So you will want to have a double check before you submit any claims. For example, if you know that Karen is being served almond milk, but this is due to taste preferences and not a disability, then you will need to disallow her meals since almond milk is not nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk, and this would cause her to have a missing fluid milk component. Instead of 29 total meals that can be claimed from room 2B, the total meals that can be claimed would only be 27. In case you need some additional guidance on what to do for special dietary needs, we have 2 memos that deal with meal accommodations for participants with disabilities. The memo titled Modifications to Accommodate Disabilities in the Child and Adult Care Food Program and Summer Food Service Program was sent out July 2017, and it updated guidance on what sponsors need to do when a participant has a disability. ODE also sent out another memo on meal accommodations in school meal programs, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and the Summer Food Service Program in April 2018. This memo detailed out the new medical statement form we went over today and provided general guidance on how to document document meal accommodations for disabilities and non-disabilities. If you ever have any questions about whether a meal is reimbursable or not when it comes to meal accommodation, check out the medical decision tree. It's not quite a flowchart, but it provides common scenarios and an answer of whether or not the meal will be reimbursable. The quick guide is also very helpful and details out many of the same information in a small pamphlet form. This is a helpful sheet to print out if you have a lot of meal accommodations to handle. So today we looked at the definition of a special dietary need. We looked at forms related to special dietary needs and what to do when you get a special dietary needs request. We also looked at a few additional resources that may help you answer some questions surrounding special dietary needs. Thank you for all you do to Feed Oregon. Have a great day.